Most people don't realize the moment their financial life is decided isn't when they choose a career or open their first brokerage account. It happens quietly in the small, invisible decisions no one teaches you to notice. Imagine this. You're 32, sitting on your couch at 11:47 p.m., staring at your bank app again, wondering how it's possible to work this hard and still feel stuck in the same place. And um, here's the uncomfortable part. It's not laziness, it's not lack of discipline. It's something deeper, almost psychological. By the end of this video, you'll understand the real reason most people never cross $250,000 net worth and how to break the pattern for good. My name is Tony, and I spend way too much time thinking about how money, psychology, and emotion all collide, and how understanding that collision can change your life. If you're tired of vague financial advice and ready to see things differently, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button if this video opens your eyes. Now, here's something that will blow your mind. You ever notice how busy you feel, but how still your finances look? It's one of the strangest things about adulthood. You can spend years in motion and somehow remain in the exact same financial place. And, that's where I want to begin, because this chapter is about a quiet trap most people don't even realize they're in. Here's the thing. Most people think they're making progress because life keeps changing around them. New job, new apartment, new phone, new subscription, new responsibilities. Emotionally, all of that feels like growth. It feels like movement. But financially, it's the equivalent of running on a treadmill. You're expending energy, you're sweating, your legs hurt, but the scenery never changes. Think about that for a second. We live in a world that rewards activity, not results. You get praised for being busy at work, not for improving your net worth. You get validation for upgrading your lifestyle, not for building your financial foundation. And so we fall into this illusion of progress, a psychological pattern where we mistake emotional relief for actual wealth creation. Let me give you a small example. Someone gets a raise, feels good, right? For a few days, they feel accomplished, proud, maybe even a little safer. But almost instantly, their brain looks for a way to convert that emotional high into comfort, a nicer couch, better shoes, food delivery more often, maybe a trip they weren't planning. There's nothing wrong with comfort. We're human, but the problem is the pattern. The moment money comes in, the mind unconsciously looks for ways to soothe itself rather than strengthen itself. And this is the core reason most people never hit that first meaningful milestone, $250,000 net worth. Not because they're irresponsible, but because their brain is wired to chase what feels like progress instead of what actually builds it. You see, your brain rewards micro wins. Upgrading your lifestyle, dopamine. Buying something new, dopamine, daughters say. Changing jobs, dopamine. Moving to a new place, dopamine. Buying a new car, a lot of dopamine. And none of these things actually grow your net worth. They just stimulate your emotions. They give you the temporary sensation that life is moving forward, even if your finances are quietly stuck. Here's the wild part. Research shows that the brain reacts to financial stress the same way it reacts to physical threat. So, naturally, we look for emotional relief, not long-term strategy. Your mind is doing what it thinks you need to survive. It's soothing the discomfort of uncertainty instead of building a financial foundation that removes the uncertainty entirely. It's like trying to build a house on a cracked foundation. Every time you put up a wall, it collapses under its own weight. You replace the wall, but never repair the foundation. And you wonder why nothing feels stable. That's what the illusion of progress does. It convinces you that you're doing enough, even when you're barely getting ahead. It makes you feel productive while keeping your net worth flatlined. But here's where it gets even more interesting, and honestly, this surprised me the first time I learned it. Most people don't break out of this pattern because the illusion is emotionally comforting. It protects you from confronting the harder truth, that real financial progress feels boring, slow, and quiet. No dopamine, no applause, no shiny upgrades. Just small, steady accumulation that doesn't impress anyone until one day it does. And that brings us to the deeper, more uncomfortable layer of this journey. Because if the illusion of progress is the trap, the real chains are the beliefs you inherited long before you ever earned a paycheck. And that's exactly what we need to talk about next. Most people don't manage money. They manage memories. Memories of hearing arguments about bills. Memories of a parent saying, "We can't afford that." Memories of feeling guilty for wanting something, or memories of watching money disappear faster than it came in. And here's the thing, those moments don't stay in childhood. They turn into internal rules, invisible rules, rules that quietly control your financial behaviors decades later without ever announcing themselves. Think about it. If you grew up in a home where money was scarce, unpredictable, or emotionally charged, your brain learned that money equals stress. Money equals conflict. Money equals instability. So even when you start earning more, your behavior still follows the old script. You might self-sabotage. You might avoid looking at your accounts, or you might fear risk so much that you stay stuck in low-growth patterns. On the other hand, if you grew up around impulsive spending, chaos, or constant lifestyle changes, your brain learned that money is meant to be consumed, not grown. So the moment you have extra, it burns a hole in your pocket. Not because you're irresponsible, but because your nervous system feels unsafe holding on to it. It's like trying to build a skyscraper, but the soil underneath was only prepared for a cottage. No matter how much concrete you pour, the foundation buckles. Not because you don't know how to build, but because you're building on ground that was shaped long before you arrived. Here's something powerful. Research shows that financial habits begin forming by age 7. By 7 years old, your brain had already decided what money means, whether it's safe, whether it's abundant or scarce, how people react when it's discussed for, and what your role is in relation to it. And once those beliefs crystallize, your adult behavior simply repeats them unless you interrupt the pattern. Let me paint a picture. Imagine two people. Person A grew up hearing, "Save every penny. Don't trust the system. Investing is risky. We could lose everything." Person B grew up hearing, "Money is a tool. We can figure it out. Invest in things that grow. There's always a way forward." Now fast forward 20 years. They both earn the same income. They both have the same opportunities. But person A hoards their money, keeps it in cash, avoids growth, and feels anxious every time the balance dips. Meanwhile, person B invests regularly, takes calculated risks, and views money as a partner, not a threat. One isn't smarter than the other. One isn't more disciplined. One simply inherited a script that makes wealth feel emotionally possible. Most people never hit $250,000 net worth because they're trying to build wealth with a script that wasn't designed for wealth, a script designed for survival, scarcity, or chaos, a script that says, money is dangerous, money is temporary, money disappears, money causes problems. And here's the part nobody talks about. Your brain would rather cling to a familiar struggle than step into an unfamiliar stability. Because familiarity feels safe, even when it's not healthy. Think about that for a moment. Your old script might be stopping you not because you're doing something wrong, but because your nervous system believes it's protecting you. So when you try to save more, you feel anxious. When you try to invest, you feel overwhelmed. When you try to build a cushion, you feel uncomfortable. It's not a knowledge problem. It's a wiring problem. Your financial behaviors aren't about willpower, they're about emotional safety. And once you see that, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself. You stop shaming yourself. You start understanding yourself. But this is where the story gets even more interesting, because even if you recognize the old script, even if you understand your patterns, there's still another force working against you. A force that hijacks your decisions in real time. A force that rewrites your plans the moment life gets stressful. survival mode. And that quietly, invisibly, is the single biggest wealth killer for most people. There's a moment, usually small, usually unnoticed, when your financial life shifts from intention to reaction. And it happens the second your brain slips into survival mode. You know the feeling. That tightness in your chest when a bill is higher than expected, that little spike of panic when your account balance is lower than you thought, that silent "I'll deal with it later" when money feels overwhelming. And um, here's the thing. Survival mode doesn't care how smart you are, how much you earn, or how responsible you want to be. It shuts down the part of your brain that plans, thinks long term, and makes strategic decisions, and it flips on the ancient wiring designed only to keep you alive for the next 24 hours. Think about that for a second. Your brain, in survival mode, doesn't want you to invest. It wants you to stay safe. It wants comfort. It wants relief. It wants the path of least emotional resistance. So even if you say, "I want to build wealth," your biology whispers, "Not now. Not until I feel safe." Here's where it gets wild. Neuroscience shows that chronic financial stress temporarily reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, planning, discipline, and long-term decision-making. In other words, the part of your brain that builds wealth goes offline the moment money starts feeling like a threat. That's why people make impulsive purchases after a bad week. That's why people avoid looking at their credit card statement. That's why people fall back into paycheck to paycheck patterns even after a raise. It's not irresponsibility, it's survival. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine you're climbing a mountain. You know the summit is financial stability, savings, investments, peace. But if a boulder suddenly starts sliding toward you, you're not thinking about the summit anymore. You're thinking about not getting crushed. Financial stress works the same way. When the boulder is rolling bills, emergencies, rent hikes, debt, your brain literally can't focus on the long term. The summit disappears. All you see is the danger. And here's the painful part most people never realize. You can be earning $80K, $120K, even $200K a year and still be in survival mode. Because survival mode isn't about income, it's about emotional bandwidth. If your expenses rise every time your income rises, if you have no real cushion, if you carry debt that constantly drains you, if you've never felt financially safe, your brain stays stuck in a loop of short-term decisions. Little things like, "I deserve a treat today. I'll invest once things calm down. I can start saving next month. I'll be more disciplined when life feels less chaotic." These aren't excuses. They're coping mechanisms. Survival mode makes long-term wealth feel like a luxury, something you'll focus on one day when life magically becomes easier. But life rarely gets easier on its own. Here's a small data point to illustrate this. Studies show that people under financial stress lose the equivalent of 13 IQ points in decision-making ability, similar to staying up all night. Not because they're less intelligent, but because their mind is overloaded. So what does survival mode do to your net worth? It makes consistency impossible. It makes planning exhausting. It makes discipline feel like self-punishment. It makes investing feel scary. It makes saving feel pointless. It makes every month feel like starting over. And, most importantly, it robs you of the mental calm required to reach that first major wealth milestone, the one where everything finally starts to get easier. Here's the hopeful part. You don't escape survival mode by earning more. You escape it by creating stability, psychological and financial, small buffers, predictable routines, habits that make your nervous system feel safe. Because once you feel safe, your brain comes back online. Your decision-making improves. Your discipline feels natural. Your long-term thinking wakes up again. And that's the turning point. Because after survival mode lifts, the path to $250K doesn't just become possible, it becomes predictable. There's a moment in wealth building that almost feels like the world quietly tilts in your favor, and most people don't realize it exists until they cross it. That moment is hitting roughly $250,000 in net worth. And Here's the strange part. The difference isn't just mathematical, it's psychological, emotional, almost biological. Let's ease into this. Picture your financial life like a boat on the ocean. When you have little or no savings, every wave feels like a crisis. A flat tire, you're underwater. A medical bill, you're drowning. Even small inconveniences feel like storms because there's no weight in your boat, nothing to stabilize you. But once you start building real net worth, not $5K, not $20K, but something meaningful, your boat gets heavier, more stable, less reactive. A wave that used to feel life-threatening now feels like a gentle lift. You begin to trust that you can handle things. That shift, that sense of psychological buoyancy, often happens around $250K, not because the number is magical, but because the impact is. Think about this for a second. At $5K savings, a $900 emergency wipes out nearly 20% of your cushion. That's terrifying. At $250K net worth, $900 is a minor inconvenience. Your nervous system barely reacts. When your nervous system calms down, your decision-making improves automatically. Your long-term thinking wakes up. Your emotional impulses quiet down, and your ability to invest consistently without panic, without hesitation, skyrockets. Here's where the data gets interesting. Financial therapists and behavioral economists have found that wealth accumulation accelerates once people hit a certain threshold of perceived safety. In other words, once your brain finally feels secure, it stops trying to survive and starts trying to build. Your mindset literally upgrades. At this point, long-term decisions no longer feel scary. Risk becomes calculated instead of emotional. Investing feels like strategy, not gambling. Saving feels purposeful instead of painful. Delaying gratification becomes natural instead of heroic. It's like the mental fog lifts, and you finally see the road ahead clearly. Let me give you a metaphor I love. Imagine building a house during an earthquake. Even if you have the best tools, the best plan, the best intentions, everything wobbles. Nothing stands straight. Every mistake feels catastrophic. That's what building wealth feels like before you hit your first major buffer. But once the financial ground beneath you stops shaking, everything gets easier. Not easier. This is why wealthy people always say, the first $100K is the hardest. And honestly, the first $250K is the real turning point. After that, compounding becomes visible, growth becomes noticeable. Your wealth starts to work with you instead of against you. It's not magic. It's momentum. And momentum only shows up once you've built enough stability to stop slipping backward. But here's the part people rarely talk about. The people who reach this threshold don't get there by accident. They don't stumble into it. They behave differently. They think differently. Their relationship with discomfort is different. Their emotional habits around money are different. And if you're watching this thinking, I don't behave like those people, don't worry, because those behaviors are learned, not inherited. There's a quiet pattern among people who cross the $250,000 net worth mark. And it's not brilliance. It's not luck. It's not even extreme discipline. It's behavior small, repeated behaviors that compound emotionally, long before they ever compound financially. Let's start with something subtle. People who break through this threshold don't chase motivation, they chase stability. They design their financial life in a way where good decisions happen automatically and bad decisions require effort. It sounds simple, but it's transformative. They automate their savings. They automate their investing. They automate their bill payments. Why? Because they understand something most people don't. Your environment will always beat your willpower. And here's the thing. Once you remove friction from the good behaviors, wealth building stops feeling like a battle. It becomes a background process. The way brushing your teeth is a background habit. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to negotiate with yourself. It just happens. Another pattern? They're comfortable with discomfort, not in a macho, hustle culture sort of way, but emotionally. They can sit with the anxiety of not upgrading their lifestyle. They can sit with the boredom of doing the same thing every month. They can sit with the uncertainty of investing in markets they can't control. They can sit with the silence of not chasing new dopamine hits. That emotional endurance is a superpower. But they also do something else. They identify as builders, not earners, not spenders, not savers. Builders. There's a subtle difference. Earners focus on income. Savers focus on restriction. Spenders focus on pleasure. Builders focus on structure. A builder asks, how do I make my future self's life easier? What systems can I put in place so I can't fall backward? How do I grow even when I'm tired, stressed, or unmotivated? This identity shift doesn't make the journey effortless, but it makes it inevitable. Let me share one more pattern, and it's my favorite. People who cross the $250K line don't rely on willpower to avoid emotional spending. They create distance. They delay. They give themselves space. A 24-hour rule before big purchases. A fixed fun budget so spending never becomes chaos. A habit of sitting with discomfort instead of soothing it instantly. They don't suppress their impulses. They manage them. And all of these behaviors come together to create momentum, real, tangible, measurable momentum, the kind where 1 month of progress leads to 2, then 6, then a year, until one day you look up and realize you're no longer fighting to get ahead. You are ahead. But here's the emotional twist. These behaviors don't just create money. They create identity. And identity is what holds everything together when life gets messy, because even the most disciplined, structured, intentional person will eventually hit an emotional wall, a moment where their old beliefs, old fears, and old scripts all come storming back. And that moment, that emotional breaking point, is where everything can fall apart or come together. There's a moment on this journey, and it happens to everyone, where the math stops mattering, the habits stop helping, and you come face to face with something deeper. A moment when you realize that the thing holding you back is not the money, but the meaning you've attached to it. It usually arrives quietly, maybe during a late night scroll through your bank app, maybe after an unexpected bill, maybe after a bad day at work. Or maybe it hits you during a moment of silence when the noise of life finally dies down long enough for truth to surface. And, here's the thing. This moment feels like failure, but it's actually an awakening, because the emotional breakpoint is the point where you finally see the story you've been living, the story you inherited, the story you didn't question, the story that shaped every decision, every fear, every pattern. For some people, the story is, I don't deserve more. For others, it's, no matter how hard I try, it won't matter. And for many, if I finally get ahead, something bad will happen. These aren't thoughts, they're imprints. They formed long before you ever earned your own money, long before you had words to describe them. They came from watching the people you loved struggle, worry, avoid, or fight about money. And without meaning to, you absorb those emotions as truth. The emotional breakpoint happens the moment you realize, this isn't my story. I've just been living inside it, and that realization hits like an emotional earthquake. Some people feel sadness. Some feel anger. Some feel relief. Most feel all three. It's the moment the old script stops being invisible. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But here's the hopeful part. This emotional unraveling isn't the end. It's the doorway, the turning point, the beginning of real, lasting change. Because once the emotional weight lifts, once you recognize that your past was shaping your future without your permission, something powerful happens. Your brain stops fighting you. Your habits start sticking. Your goals stop feeling impossible. Your identity begins shifting. You begin to feel capable. You begin to feel intentional. You begin to feel free. Not financially free, emotionally free. And emotional freedom is the soil where real wealth grows. This is the threshold. the moment when survival mode ends and self-leadership begins. And once you step through it, the next chapter happens almost naturally, the quiet, steady identity shift that transforms not just your net worth, but your life.